In this Elden Ring guide, I will show you exactly what you need to do to completely trivialize the final boss fight in Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, it goes without saying that this is a pretty silly method for taking out Promised Consort Radahn, but these tools are part of the toolbox available to you in the game, and if you've simply had enough of getting obliterated by his almost non-stop combos, then this will end your suffering very quickly. And while this method makes the fight incredibly easy in comparison to fighting him normally, you're still going to have to use your brain a little at least to minimize the damage you take trying to pull this off. So let's dig in. There are 3 critical components to making this work, while the other components are optional suggestions that will make things much easier and more consistent. So it's up to you whether you want to implement all steps past the first 3 here before you step back into the ring to test your mettle. First things first, if you are not at Erdtree level 20 at this point and you've been getting your ass pancaked throwing yourself at Radahn over and over, then go out and finish that first. You literally double your damage and effective HP by maxing this out, and if you have any intention of playing everything the DLC has to offer, then this is a no-brainer first step. I guarantee that I have the most comprehensive and efficient guide possible for finding all 50 fragments, so give that a watch if you're missing any fragments before you suffer any more at the hands of the Promised Consort. Second, and also vital to this strategy, is that we want to use a Great Shield with 100% physical damage negation, as high a guard boost as possible, and finally, as much holy damage negation as we can find. Now, if you're running a build with low strength, you likely are going to need to cough up a larval tear to respec to at least 35 strength to run a shield with high enough guard boost to tank Radahn's hits, ideally 48 or 49 strength for the 2 best shields. The majority of Radahn's attacks in Phase 1 and 2 deal physical damage. Being able to wall up behind a Great Shield either completely nullifies his damage or reduces it by a significant amount for attacks that aren't purely physical. The Fingerprint Great Shield is a pretty known shield for being used in turtling situations, as it has insanely high defensive stats against all element types and a very high guard boost, though you can realistically run any Great Shield you want as long as it has 100 physical defense and above 70 guard boost, I'd say. His Phase 2 attacks have significant holy damage components too, so the Blacksteel Great Shield that you get from clearing the Fog Rift Fort by Scadu Altus west side of Grace is technically better resistance-wise, though it has a slightly lower guard boost, so you'll consume more stamina per block as a trade-off. You can find the Fingerprint Shield by going through the subterranean shunning grounds until you find and kill Moog the Omen King, then you hit the back of his arena to reveal a hidden passage, then platform down to the shield. It's honestly a massive detour that probably isn't worth it just for this fight, but feel free to look into it if you really want to max out your chances of success here. Plus, it requires 49 strength versus the 35 for the Blacksteel to wield properly. Another alternative is the Verdigris Great Shield, which you get from completing Moore's questline in the DLC. So, assuming you pick the Move On option when interacting with Moore after Miquella's Great Rune breaks, along with his spell over his followers when you approach the Black Keep, you will be able to fight Moore during the Royal Rumble just before Radahn, and loot his armor set after killing him. If you don't end up with his shield and don't want to get the Fingerprint Shield, then just opt for the Blacksteel Great Shield instead. It should be enough assuming you upgrade it to plus 24 to up its guard boost a little bit more. Now that you have your Great Shield, we need our second critical component, our weapon. Our weapon of choice needs to be something that we can attack with while in the guarding position behind our Great Shield, and our 2 options here are thrusting swords or any type of spear, including Great Spear. We also want something with Scarlet Rot as a passive on it, and that makes our only viable candidate here the Antspur Rapier. The reason we want Scarlet Rot is because it applies a strong, continuous amount of damage which deals both flat damage and a percentage of enemy HP per second that can continue to tick down while we soak up the constant onslaught of attacks from Radahn, as there are very limited windows to attack in Phase 2. You can find the Antspur Rapier just to the west of the Shaded Castle in the Altus Plateau in the main game world, where you'll find Malay Marai Shaded Castle Castellan, who will drop the Rapier on death. Once you have this, you'll want to upgrade it to plus 24 if you have the means to do so, as you'll still want to do some actual damage on hit with it, but you're also going to want to apply any Ash of War on it that can change its affinity to bleed so that you can proc Blood Loss on Radahn as well, which deals percent max HP damage. Because both of these passives deal max HP, you don't need to worry about having high dex to deal actual weapon damage. So long as you have the strength to use your shield of choice, you're good to go. You have lots of options here. It doesn't really matter what you pick, as you won't be using the Ash of War at all. At this point, you technically have everything you need to take Radahn down on your own, but there's a lot more you can do to make things significantly easier. If you're comfortable with just using this, you can skip ahead to the fight itself. Otherwise, consider these following options to increase your chances of success. For talismans, I highly recommend running a Great Shield talisman, as it will dramatically lower the stamina consumption for blocking Radahn's attacks, and I'd say it's almost a must-have if you're not running the Fingerprint or Verdigris shield. The two-headed turtle talisman from the DLC is also highly recommended, as it will help you nullify a lot of the stamina drain you experience while constantly blocking Radahn's attacks. It's far more important than having a high total stamina pool, I'd say, in most cases. Other defensive options include your best Haligdrake talisman or the Golden Braid, which is basically the +3 version of the Haligdrake talisman for maximum holy damage negation, or you could opt for the Pearl Shield talisman that reduces all non-physical damage while blocking, which you'll almost always be doing when you take hits using this method. Also, the Crimson Seed talisman +1, in case you want to make sure your heals are topping you up to full HP more consistently, and then Erdtree's favor for general boost to HP, stamina, and equip load. Finally, offensive options that work well include the Kindred Rot's Exaltation, since you'll almost always be in the presence of rot or poison. Items that you want to think about bringing with you include Exalted Flesh, Crab Meat for physical reduction if you get caught and don't block an attack, any forms of holy damage reducers like Holy Liver or Pickled Liver, Pickled Turtlenecks for stamina regen, which are very useful, Golden Vows for damage and defense boosting, and then Uplifting Aromatics to tank a hit in Phase 2 if you're scared of being hit by one of his big boom attacks. For spells, you could consider bringing in anything that will boost your damage, like Golden Vow or Flame Grant Me Strength. I would only use these prior to going into the boss room, along with most of the items mentioned above, because you'll have very few windows to actually use them during the fight, and you should reserve those moments to either deal damage or heal as necessary. The start of Phase 2 is the only other time you should think about doing this, but it can be risky to do so as well, which I'll cover later. For Flask of Wondrous Physic, I would say the two best tiers to take with you are the Opaline Bubble tier for tanking a hit, and the Viridian Bubble tier to remove all stamina consumption during its uptime, as this is your most critical resource in Phase 2 to survive his onslaught if you're not doing real dodging. Honestly though, you can use whatever tier suits you best. I think this is probably the least important aspect to the strategy. As for summons, it's completely optional whether you bring one into the fight, and if you're a purist, you certainly don't need to, but if you are going to, we all know that the Mimic tier is pretty damn strong, especially if it's going to be running your loadout to make proccing rot and bleed significantly easier. If anything, your summon is going to help you, but it's going to be tough to summon. Okay, that covers just about everything you would want to bring with you into the fight. Let's talk about the fight itself. Use any items you're planning to pre-pop before you go into the boss room, get your summon ready, walk through the fog, but don't call it until you see whether Radahn is going to do his purple lightning spin attack at you instantly as you walk in. If he's not casting it right away, then just send it and try to summon your summon. Otherwise, let him do the attack, do your dodge roll, which you can do pretty early and not take damage from, so keep that in mind to get some extra frames. Let the attack happen, and then try to cast your summon. There's still a very good chance he gets one attack off on you, but you just have to be ready to hold your block button as soon as you get back up, and then start tanking the hits with your Great Shield. Now, if you know his attack patterns reasonably well, you can definitely play the fight out properly, but you're honestly much better off just blocking the attacks so that you can attack at the same time with your rapier and start stacking up the bleed and rot. As your stamina drops from blocking attacks, you're going to want to let go of the guard button to quickly regain stamina in between attacks if you know the timings well, and then for sure after he fully finishes a combo so that you're not deprived of stamina when he starts his next combo. After 10 hits you'll usually proc rot, and 11 you'll proc bleed, assuming you have 50 rot and 83 bleed build up on your rapier, and this was only with 20 arcane in my case. The rot requirement doubles in Phase 2, but the bleed requirement remains the same, only scaling with each additional proc, so it'll take a couple extra hits for each one after that. But you should be able to get 2 or 3 off during the fight. Here's some general advice for dodging attacks that will otherwise damage you in Phase 1, and will also show up in Phase 2. So when Radahn is queuing up his lightning meteor attack, you'll see him dig both swords into the ground as they turn purple with lightning, but there's a solid delay before they lift up and he launches the rocks into the air. This can be easily dodged almost every time as long as you're patient and don't panic roll when he puts the swords in the ground. You need to wait to see him actually start moving to lift them up. If you don't dodge here and you decide to just hold your block button, you'll take some chip damage through the blocks, but you'll be completely fine. As he then prepares to throw the rocks from above, you should always run exactly backwards from where he's facing, and then as soon as he throws the rocks, run completely left or right, and then jump just before the rocks reach you. Don't roll here, it's far less consistent. The only time you want to consider rolling is if you couldn't run far enough away and are very close to him before this attack. Realistically though, just holding your guard up to block the meteors should be enough. None of the other attack combos that he does in phase 1 are a big enough threat to worry about with your shield up. I would say just continually try to rotate around him as you're fighting, moving your character in a clockwise fashion around him, so moving to your left around his right side during combos, as this can help mitigate damage from some attacks. Another very important note is to make sure that you're only healing at the end of a full combo where you know no more follow-up attacks are coming. This goes for all phases, especially phase 2, as healing is one of the only times where you'll ever have your guard down, so you'll be taking full damage if you're hit during this time, and it's pretty easy to get fully comboed out. Don't panic if your HP is low. It's better to guarantee that one of his combos is done than to chance a heal just to die during it. Once you hit phase 2, you have exactly enough time to drink 2 doses of your healing or FP flask before he either does a random attack, or more likely than not, he charges up his giant explosion orb. Use this time however you want. You could heal up, pop an item, or use your flask of physic. Just don't waste this calm before the shitstorm. If he ends up doing the orb explosion, then this is the one where he stands in place and does some sort of charging animation, and you'll see around your character sort of a sphere of light being generated. As soon as you see him do this animation, literally run in any direction, but do not change course at all, and assuming you reacted fast enough, you'll never ever be hit by it. If for some reason you are late to react to him doing this charge up, instead just face him and pull your guard up and tank the hit. If you're blocking, you will not take very much damage at all. The follow-up holy lasers that fall down will need to be dodged and are usually fairly random, so just pay attention and roll as necessary. This is a safe window to use a heal or items, assuming you're not getting hit by the lasers, but even if you get hit by 1 or 2, it's probably going to be fine. After the lasers finish dropping, however, Radahn is about to go to town on you. His combos are much more aggressive, have more attacks in general, plus holy damage AoE that can be very difficult to dodge, so keep your guard up. Unless you know these patterns very well, then you need to be ready to soak up almost all of the holy damage that comes your way while you block to minimize it, and you need to learn how to drop your shield between those longer hits to keep that stamina as high as possible. It can be a little tough to get used to, but thankfully if you are just holding your guard up, it'll give you more time to properly look at his combos and figure out your opening. Get attacks in where you can when your stamina is high enough, and try to get your rot going as early as possible. Your Mimic should help here a lot, but they're likely going to die at some point in the fight, especially if he does some of the big AoE attacks. Similar to phase 1, you want to stay as close to Radahn as possible and circle around him clockwise again. This will minimize the amount of holy AoE that can actually hit you during the fight. Obviously, if you're face tanking a lot of these hits, you're going to need to heal at some point, but again, make sure you're doing this at the end of very distinct combos, because if your guard is down, you are going to be taking the full brunt of his damage, and you will likely get 2 to 3 shot depending on your scatty tree level. If you're a lower level character and you can't afford to have high endurance, this is going to be a lot tougher for you, and you're going to have to be even more diligent about managing your stamina. So just be careful, pay attention, and use those openings to gain stamina back where you can. If you're really struggling with this, you should consider using some Talismans or Consumables that will give you additional stamina regen or max stamina to help you out a little bit. With that said, there are 2 more attacks you really need to watch out for during phase 2 that can end you very quickly. The first is his grab attack, where Miquella will apply a curse of sorts indicated by a golden crown above your head on the first instance, and the second time you just die because it says your heart was stolen. This attack is actually incredibly easy to avoid, and the timing for it is actually very obvious once you know it. As soon as you see this animation play where Radahn gets ready to jump at you, the moment his feet lift off the ground, you can dodge roll and you'll never get hit by it, and the window is actually pretty big. Just don't panic and be patient and wait for that jump. The second attack is significantly more lethal, and that's his Omega Explosion, similar to what you would have seen in the original Radahn fight where he comes down like a meteor and makes a giant explosion. If you do not run far enough away, you'll take massive damage, and if you're too close to the center, you'll be hit multiple times and will almost certainly die every single time. As soon as you see this animation, you need to book it in any direction that has lots of open ground to cover, and assuming you did this within 1 or 2 seconds of seeing this animation, you should avoid all damage possible, even though it'll look like you're caught in the giant explosion. If you have an oh shit moment and it's too late, then you need to pop your flask of physic or an uplifting aromatic and still run as far as you can to minimize the damage. By this point, Radahn will likely be close to dead as well, so just finish him off with whatever you can, and assuming you had enough heals to make it through the fight, you should emerge victorious with a remembrance of the Promised Consort. Otherwise, congratulations, you've bested the beast and may adorn yourself with thy crown, Tarnished. It may not have been the most honorable battle, but goddamn, you did it. If you found this video helpful and are looking for more high quality Elden Ring content, then consider subscribing and drop a comment or a like if you want to help support the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.